Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we are looking at Aragorn, everyone's favourite king in exile. And I have a fantastic guest to introduce you to. You will, or you may know him, it's a relatively recent channel, as The Red Book. Please welcome Stephen.
Hello, how's everyone doing?
Excellent. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your channel and what you sort of focus on and things like that?
Yeah. The channel's The Red Book, like Robert said. I've been a channel for about 8 months now, and it's a purely book focused channel for Tolkien. No videos about adaptations or anything like that. And there's a big mix of content over the months. It started with just my analysis of the text, and it grew into looking at how the text changed over many drafts, looking at inconsistencies, using the text to answer what I think are pretty interesting questions that aren't really talked about often, and it just kind of grew from there. So about 45 videos or something at the moment, and I think there's a bit of content there for everyone, no matter if you're new to Tolkien or you've read him for years. So that was the idea behind the channel. So hopefully it's been successful. So, and you can find me at the Red Book, and I think the link's in the description. I think you've put the description there. The link
Absolutely.
in there. So.
There's a link down in the description. Also, if you're watching this live, I'm sure the moderators will drop a link in there as well. Talking of which, moderators, thank you so much. You always do an amazing job. I'm going to say thank you at the beginning of the stream, just in case you are needed to be zapping any bots like I know did have to last week. Let's start as we always do. We will get into Aragorn in just one moment. I will frame this as I always do around questions from my patrons. Stephen also, a few of his regular subscribers provided a couple of questions as well this time. And I will try and pick up as many questions from the chat as we're going through. But what I tried to start with just very briefly is a few of the things going on in the wider world of fantasy TV and books. And for the last probably 3 weeks, I think it's been, as I've been doing a Song of Ice and Fire live streams, Lord of the Rings have been dropping things literally on the day, and I've had to spend a huge amount of time covering that, which I've obviously loved doing, but not what I was planning on doing. The moment I choose to do a Lord of the Rings live stream, obviously they don't drop anything today. But we have a couple of things which did happen this week, just updates on things we know are happening anyway. The first is The War of the Rohirrim, which is an anime movie which is based obviously in Middle-earth. Looking at the writers Rohan and Rohirrim, long way back in history within the Third Age. And this is, for those who care about who owns the rights of these things, this is coming from New Line Cinema. This is that part of the production. So the same kind of feel that we had from the Peter Jackson movies long time ago. And we have had confirmation Philippa Boyens, who was a key part of that creative team, is attached to this project as well, which I personally think is quite reassuring. If you think of any of the great speeches you loved in the Lord of the Rings main movies, then she was the person who crafted those, obviously using Tolkien's words a lot of the time, but she sort of pulls together speeches from different parts of the book. And that we're expecting now, March 2024. So a little way to wait. Now, Stephen, I know you were actually on a podcast with, I think it was the Melonheads, weren't you, talking about this? Yep. Are you looking forward to this?
Probably more than the Rings of Power series, I think. I think not just because of all the drama surrounding that, but I've always thought that animation was really a good place to show off Tolkien. You can do a lot more in that than you can do in a film or a TV show. So, people have always talked about something like the Silmarillion being really good if it was an animated series or something like that. So they can do a lot with animation. I'm a fan of animation as well. So and I like the history of Rohan. So I've been keeping up with that, and it's excited me a bit more than what Amazon's getting up to. So, man, what about yourself?
Yeah, I am really looking forward to this. What I'm intrigued by, this is the story effectively of Helm Hammerhand, one of the great kings in the history of Rohan. What I'm fascinated with is the way that that character, when I read the story, he doesn't come across as 100% a good guy, although he's remembered in the history of Rohan as a fantastic king. When you read what he does, a lot of the time you go, that's probably not good. Maybe that was effective, but it may not put him on the side of peace, justice, and righteousness. So what I'm interested in is how they're going to show this, because certainly when they approach things like the main Lord of the Rings, this is New Line and Philippa Boyens and so on, and so on, and The Hobbit, it was very much good versus bad. Here's a heroes, here's a baddies. This is, I hope, going to be a lot more nuanced. So I am looking forward to it. I'm also looking forward to the Rings of Power. Sounds like a bit more than you are, but I am very much looking forward to it. The other thing that we've had a little bit of a progress report on is House of the Dragon. Not huge amounts of progress, but we have finally been told filming has finished. This has been going on, I think, about 9 months they've been filming this season 1. This is going to be a good old-fashioned 10-episode season. And George R. R. Martin has in fact opined on when we might get to see this. And he said this: are we going to see it this spring? Unlikely. Summer? Could be. Fall? Autumn? Who knows? So rather than me speculating, as I have done a few times, on when we're going to see it, that's what George R. R. Martin thinks. I did note, having circulated that on Twitter, somebody did point out that he hasn't got the best of track records in terms of estimating when things are going to be arriving in his universe. But I think now it's finished filming, I think we can expect a few months of, however you wish to interpret that, of post-production before we actually see it. And as I've said before, I'm pretty sure that they will try to avoid doing it at the same time as The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, because they won't want to be trying to share front covers of all of the big Vanity Fair and Hollywood Reporter magazine, things like that. Okay, so that's the update on a few things going on. Let's get into the meat of what we're going to talk about today, which is Aragorn. And Aragorn, I think, is a fantastically detailed character that Tolkien draws out within this one story. We see, I think, quite a lot of growth and a clear arc. We'll come back to a lot of that. What I thought I would do was give a 3-minute overview of his story, and then Stephen, perhaps if you want to come in and pick up on a few things maybe you'd want to emphasize, and then we'll get into a few of the questions. So Aragorn is, as we know, he's the heir of Isildur, the royal line of Numenor. Now, they were up in the Northern Kingdom, and the Northern Kingdom, way back in history, was destroyed over a number of years by the Witch King of Angmar, until finally, although the entire Northern Kingdom of Armenor had gone, the royal family remained effectively. The hardcore remained, the Dunedain in the north, which we call the Rangers. Aragorn is of the line of the king there, and they stayed in the area around where they used to rule, guarding it, protecting it, looking after. One of the places they looked after was the Shire, for example, and they stayed there. Now, Aragorn himself was born the son of Arathorn, who had been the previous chieftain of the Dunedain, of the Rangers of the North, and he, unfortunately, Arathorn, died when Aragorn was 2. Aragorn was raised in Rivendell by Elrond, and at the age of 21, that's when Elrond said, by the way, I didn't tell you this before, but you are the king that was promised. You are the heir of this line. Here's this sword that was broken. Here's the ring of Barahir. That's what your destiny is. That's who you are. So at this point, his life kind of changes. He heads out into the wilds. He learns, he explores, he becomes the chieftain, the leader. He encounters Gandalf. And with Gandalf, they then get quite close, and they operate for a number of years, working behind the scenes. All the things that we think of as Gandalf was doing, like trying to figure out what's going on with Sauron, chasing down Gollum, which took 16 years, I think it was, a long time, him and Aragorn hunted down Gollum just to try and join up the missing links of this story of what happened to the One Ring. Aragorn does capture him eventually in the Dead Marshes, carries him all the way up to Thranduil in northern Mirkwood, where they do a particularly inept job of keeping him prisoner. But anyway, Aragorn heads across at this point, and he heads back, and this is where we meet him again in the story that we know. Outside Bree, waiting for the hobbits, because he's friends with Gandalf. He knows what Gandalf's plan is, and Gandalf has told him that Frodo's going to be heading that way. So then we get the story that we know in The Lord of the Rings. I won't recap over that. We can go into some of the details of that in a moment. At the end of all of this, he is the High King of both of the kingdoms, the kingdom in the north, Arnor, and also Gondor, the kingdom in the south. He marries Arwen, and then he reigns again. I think it's for another 120 years. It is a good and long reign. And Tolkien, he gives us some details about what he does in that time, but he kind of just sort of summarizes by saying, and he was a good king, and the realm thrived. And after that, he has a son, several daughters, and they survive him, and the rule carries on, at which point Tolkien's history kind of peters out, and that age of imagination that he had, that era of imagination, slowly shifts and towards becoming the stage of imagination that we are in now. So that's my sort of overview of Aragorn. Is there anything, Stephen, you'd like to emphasize, or anything that you think is really important to help us understand who Aragorn is, what he's about, something like that?
I don't want to just say no, but that was a really good summary. But the way I speak, I would have probably taken about 20 minutes to say all that. But I think we'll probably end up talking about this, but I'd really like to talk about what Aragorn was doing before the main story, The Lord of the Rings, and that importance of, you said he went out into the world, and that we kind of hear about that little bits and pieces in The Lord of the Rings, fighting for Gondor, fighting for Rohan, and even going to visit the lands of these enemies. We could probably get into that based on questions that people ask, but I think those parts we don't hear about in The Lord of the Rings, it's very Tolkien-esque. We have to go beyond that one story to learn more about such an important character, just like someone like Gandalf. You learn so much more about him by getting into all these extra books, all these stories outside Lord of the Rings. So I'd like at some point to focus a bit on his history and how that shapes, like you say, that figure we meet in Bree. I think that's very important. So hopefully that will come up as a question at some point.
Absolutely. We have a few questions now. I just want to quickly pick up on a couple of super chats before we went on air. Britt Logan, thank you, very generous. I hugely appreciate that. And also we had one from Devyani saying, Thursdays are great days because of you. Thank you. And the beautiful Dan the dog. Dan has, as he usually does, taken himself up to bed, which is he's getting to be an old dog now. He's 5 years old, very ancient for a dog, nearly middle-aged, I would say. But let's talk a little bit about some of those things that you were wanting to get into, because I agree, it's fascinating. This Tolkien created the background to this character. He doesn't just suddenly emerge fully formed there in Bree. He does have a huge background to him. Diego Godoy says, Hola, Robert. Hola, Diego. Why was Aragorn fostered at Rivendell when his father passed away? Why not some other place? And Mara Lee also asked, was the reason that Aragorn was a descendant of Elrond's brother the reason why Elrond took him in and tried to help and encourage him along the path? What do you think, Stephen? Is there more to it? Because this is true. Elrond's brother Elros was the first king of Numenor, and then you can trace it down 30-something generations and get to Aragorn. Is that the reason why, or do you think there's more to it?
Well, we have to remember that it didn't start with Aragorn. Ever since Arahil, the son of Aronarth, Elrond has been looking after the chieftains of the Dunedain. He's been given the care of heirlooms, the Elendilmere, the Sceptre of Anuminas, Ring of Barahir, even the Shards of Narsil. So I've never actually thought it was to do with his relationship with Elros, which is quite interesting, but I think Elrond has a duty that he's taken on since the Northern Kingdoms fell, and when Aragorn's young, it's no different from what he's done before. His duty is to look after him, and it's only when Aragorn comes of age that he realizes there's something different about this figure than those before, and we get all these really great conversations between them in the appendices. But it's not. I don't think he's taken on this duty just because of Elros. I think once those Northern Kingdoms fell, Elrond thinks centuries ahead. He doesn't think just a few years, and he has that foresight, and he knows at some point this line is going to be important, and I think that's got a lot more to do with it. Just what I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I disagree. I think that there is definitely an element here. I think somewhere it does sort of hint at it in one of the texts about this. This is Elrond does have a familial link here, and he sort of feels a sense of obligation. They were twin brothers, Elrond and Elros, and as I say, so Elros went off and chose the mortal life. Elrond chose the immortal life, the life of being an elf, and so he does always have this interest in this line. But so it's not just about Aragorn. I think, though, that there is a hint that Aragorn was treated slightly differently, in that we're told that the wise, which is a sort of a rather vague and generic term that Tolkien sometimes uses to mean Galadriel and Elrond and Gandalf, Círdan, people like that, the wise decided that he shouldn't be told his identity when he was young in order to protect him, because Sauron was on the move basically again by this point. So I think there was a slight difference there, but I was fascinated by what you were talking about, Elrond and his kind of far-sightedness. Do you think, and this may come up again I think a bit later, but do you think that Elrond he could sort of sense the future in a way? He could sort of sense that he was going to have an important role here, so as a base, as a place for hope for the people, the humans of Middle Earth?
Yeah, well, we know he was given the name by his mother, which Estel, which is hope, and names are obviously really important throughout the whole Legendarium. So that would really mean something that he was given that name. But I think you hinted at it there when you said they kept his identity a secret from him until he came of age because of Sauron. And I think that a lot of that's important because it's to do with destiny. This time in history, it's all coming together, and it seems like all the pieces have moved to this point where Aragorn, with no children, if he goes, there's no hope for kings. It's all coming down to the hope of Aragorn reuniting the kingdoms. So I think Elrond's foresight must have played a part where he sees that this is the moment. We have to put all our hope and our trust into Aragorn, help him how we can, and there's no second chances. If Aragorn fails, Gondor doesn't have a king, the kingdoms aren't reunited, and we're talking about a destiny over centuries and centuries leading to this one important moment. And that's why I was saying that Elrond doesn't just think, I have to look after this figure, there'll be another one afterwards. It's like, no, this is it. We have to put all our eggs in this basket. It's Aragorn or nothing, and Elrond would know that from the gift of foresight he has.
Yes, and I think that's absolutely true. I was just going to flick through actually to ahead to a question one of your subscribers had about the importance of Aragorn's sword, and why Tolkien focuses on it so much in the story. The specific question was, why does he carry it around broken. Now, I think there's a bigger question here about the importance of the sword that perhaps, Stephen, if you want to pick up on. But in terms of why does Aragorn carry it around? And he does, incidentally. Tolkien did once in one of his letters talk about why didn't Aragorn draw his sword at a certain point, and it's like because his sword was broken, so it's very clear that he was lugging it around with him. But I think this is it's quite a basic point, but it's quite an important point to understanding Aragorn. As you say, he is the last in his line. His father has died. He's not got any siblings. That's it. All of these heirlooms, and Elrond had been holding on to these heirlooms. These are the symbols of kingship for the Northern Kingdom. They were now his. And basically, if he died, then that's it. It actually doesn't matter. Yeah, he could have left Narsil lying around in Rivendell or wherever, but he might as well have it with him partly because it's inheritance and it's the symbol of who he is, but also it's just him now. And it's not you can hold this for my son. He's not got any children. You can hold this for my brother. No. But talk a little bit about Narsil, because this is a theme that goes through his life, and obviously the reforging and the renaming. Why does Tolkien focus in so much on this?
Well, part of what you said there about giving him Narsil, we have to remember that there's a specific moment when they reforge the sword. Like he's lived in Rivendell. He's been given the sword. He could have reforged it when he was given it, but the tradition for his people was that there would be a sign given. The time would come where they would reforge a sword, which was the revelation about Isildur's Bane. So it's a symbol that's being carried, waiting for a sign that's given. It's very, again, I'm going to use this word destiny a lot. Anytime you talk about Aragorn, you have to talk about destiny. And to me, I think Narsil, and especially when it becomes Anduril, I've always seen it as Aragorn's crown, before he's really given a crown. That's why he's so protective of it. He doesn't even want anyone else to touch it. Because you can imagine it's the equivalent of going into Mediceld and handling King Theoden's crown. No one's allowed to do that. And before Aragorn actually becomes king, once he's earned it, he has this sword. That's what he's been given, and that's his whole lineage, and the symbol of not only his family tree, but it's pretty much a symbol for men. It represents hope. It broke when Elendil fell, and all this time we've been waiting for men to recover, and that Aragorn knows all of this, and that's how important it is for Tolkien. It carries this sword because it's more than just a sword. It's very symbolic of everything that's important to Aragorn and all his people, and his quest to become a king. This is his crown until he actually wins that throne, and that's how I've always viewed Narsil and Anduril. It's far more important than anything else he's been given, and no one's allowed to take it from him. And you can't get more important than that. It's coming down to the King Arthur Excalibur kind of comparison. It goes with Aragorn. It becomes a part of him. That's how I've always viewed it. We can't get more important than Narsil or Anduril in the Lord of the Rings. It's more than a weapon.
It is, and I think symbolically as well, this is one of those things that Tolkien uses to kind of bookend the age. So we get the end of the Second Age, beginning of the Third Age. We get the sword, Narsil cutting the ring from Sauron, and causing his downfall. And at the end, this is why it becomes really important. And Aragorn shows the sword to Sauron. Symbolically, he's saying, and this is going to happen again. This is the end of this age, which it was the end of that age, and the reforging of that sword was one of the parts that led to the downfall of Sauron, again, a kind of
Exactly.
bookending the age. And I think, incidentally, this is slight digression, but this is the kind of thing Tolkien does a few times in kind of bookending things. You get in the first age, for example, the end of what happened before was the trees, the light from the trees goes and is sort of drunk by Ungoliant, destroyed. At the end of the first age, that's when the Silmarils go, which was they were holding the last light from there. And so again, he's kind of bookending the age with that kind of symbolic thing. And here, I think he's bookending the third age with what's going on with the sword Narsil. Okay, let's go to had a super chat from Jeremy Ryan. Thank you very much, saying been following Robert for a few years, and I'm so glad to say that I've been following the Red Book since day one. You guys are awesome. Thanks for the wonderful content. Well, thank you very much. A day one fan. This is one of your OGs there, Stephen.
Yeah.
So
he was there. He was there when the with the videos that I can't go back and watch. They're really bad, but he's stuck around.
I know them well. This is a badge of pride for YouTubers, it has to be said. To have videos that you dare not go back and watch. I know very well my first few videos, and I can remember them exactly. But I think I would cringe so much if I went back and watched them. And I do know, though, I did spot when I last checked, they got a lot more views than when I first launched, obviously, because some people have randomly gone back, and you go, I don't know if I really want people to watch those anyway. But digression. This is YouTuber life. Let's go to a question from 444, which is kind of linked into all of this. We're talking about the life before Aragorn, before the Lord of the Rings, before Aragorn became king. Asking, do we know what happened before the Lord of the Rings? What about the rest of the Rangers and the Dunedain in the same time? So you started talking about this a little bit ago. We've got him going out into the wild. So there's a few elements to this, basically, of what he was doing. He went out into the wilds, met Gandalf, they got on. He also then went off down to Rohan, and he sort of rode with the riders of Rohan for a while. Then he went down to Gondor, and he hung out around Minas Tirith for a while with the steward there, Ecthelion, and then after that he went off on another bit of a wander that we don't get huge amounts of detail about. Are there any of those things you'd like to kind of pick up on that you think is really kind of important in terms of his character and the development of who he is?
Yeah, it shows that when Aragorn learns that he's this really important figure and he should be a king, he doesn't just march into Gondor and declare, it's my birthright, I'm supposed to be king, so give me the throne. He actually goes out into the world, and Tolkien says it's to learn the hearts of men, even if it's good or evil. So, and this is what I was saying at the intro, where it comes back in Lord of the Rings, because when he meets Eomer, he talks about knowing his father, and he talks about knowing King Thengel as well, and he also talks about Ecthelion for Gondor, and it's as if he's done his part. He's shown that he's earned his stripes. Basically, he's fought in these battles with these people in the past, and he's not just showing up to say, because of my name and who I descend from, I deserve this throne. He's actually went out into the world to fight for it, to earn it, and that's part of what Elrond tells him at the beginning. You have to earn this scepter. It's not just going to get handed to you. And then he also goes east and south as well. He tells us that at the Council of Elrond, and that's to learn, the motives and the hearts of his enemies as well. And so it's not all just journeying to Rohan and Gondor. He actually travels around Middle Earth, and he's shown that he's more than just an heir. I'm going to go and take this throne now. He's well travelled. He's spent decades doing this, and he's earned the respect of people that he wants to help when this war starts, and maybe people that are his enemies will fear him when they learn who he is as well. So it's maybe a bit of that comes into play. But yeah, he does quite a lot before the Lord of the Rings, and that's how we get to that figure that we meet, because he's not a young man when we meet him. He's already been through a lot. You know?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good point about showing his character, because when he was told, you are the heir, you are the king, he could have gone, okay, well, in that case, I'm going to go and claim my crown. As a young man, as 21, maybe he could have thought that was the thing that he could do, but he didn't. He went and he, as you say, he learned. And Tolkien is very clear that this wasn't just him going off and having some fun. He was actively going out to try and learn and understand the world. And I think that this shows itself in the Aragorn that we see. Partly that, yes, he can do the obvious stuff that we know about. He can guide Frodo and co across to Rivendell to start with. That's because he was a ranger. That's because he spent his time out there in the wilds. But also, he knew the world out much further and wider, and he understood both people and also the way that Sauron and his minions worked. One for A Song of Ice and Fire fans, I think there's quite an echo of this, the earlier point actually, in Egg from the Duncan Egg stories, when Egg goes around the kingdom and he learns about the kingdom before becoming a king. And that makes him a very different king than if he'd just grown up in a palace and been told from the start, you're going to be a king. Here's how you rule. He actually goes and understands people. So that is the kind of a feeling, I think, that an echo of what was happening here with Aragorn was understanding the kingdoms that he was going to be ruling much later, as well as the people who are there. A couple of quick shout outs. I did notice in the chat we have a couple of excellent other channels. We've got both Girl Next Gondor, Lexi, and also Dan from Voice of Geekdom. Hi, both of you. Great to see you there. Is there anything, before I move on from that, is there anything else on that you want to sort of pick up on?
Yeah, just something quick. He's learned from history as well, because you were saying he's not going to swagger into Gondor, and it's not just about his bloodline. We see that in the Lord of the Rings, where it's the deeds that he performs, the healing hands and all of this stuff. It's not just, I descend from this person, so by right I should be king, so give me the kingship. Because we know that earlier in the history of the chieftains, Arvid, he made a claim. When he found out who he was, he went to claim the kingship, and there was actually another claimant as well, and they went with Eärnil. So Aragorn, despite there not being someone else that could claim it, there's always the chance that if he went too early to do it, before the time was right, he could ruin any chance of actually being accepted. It has to be accepted by nobility and the common people of Gondor as well. So there's a lot more going on than just his really impressive family tree for Aragorn.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more there. I think this makes for such a rounded king as well, that he's a person who we actually think, yeah, I want to follow him, not just because he's the king, but just because he is a leader as well.
He acts like a king too. He's got it's more than just a title. He's got that kingly behaviour that people want to, like you say, side with him, or even die for him. Basically, he's earned it, and that kind of shines through his presence and personality that he's earned over all those years. So
yeah. And we have the other part of the question from 444 was, what about the rest of the Rangers and the Dunedain at the same time? I just sort of very briefly, because Tolkien doesn't give us a huge breakdown of this because obviously he's more interested in Aragorn, but it does appear that the other rangers in the north are doing the ranger thing with him. He does meet up with them a lot. We do get a few mentions of them. He sends them to guard the Sarn Ford when he's waiting for Frodo to come out. One of the ways into the Shire is this ford. He sends them to guard that, and they do. The Black Riders do manage to get through, but they sort of hold them off for a bit. And then we also get one of the coolest groups, the Grey Company, who they were up with Aragorn, and then they get this message, which people seem to try and not quite sure where this message came from. It seems to have come from Galadriel, but basically saying, come down and help out Aragorn, and they do. And when you get that wonderful bit, if you remember in the movies, when he's going to get the dead men of Dun Harrow, in the movies, that was just, I think it was just the three of them actually, him and Legolas and Gimli, but they had the Grey Company with them as well, which were this crack team of rangers along with them as well, who then follow all the way up and into the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. So we don't get huge amounts of information, but that which we have suggests they're doing what we think they should be doing, which is behind the scenes, not getting the glory for themselves, but actually doing really good work. Interesting addition just to this, talking about Aragorn's character development before the stories. Robert Slevin saying Arwen also kindly deflated his youth, saying useful exuberance. I think that's youthful exuberance and pride shortly after learning his lineage and met her. Yeah, this is quite interesting because he did. It was quite soon after that he met Arwen and fell in love. Do you think, well, what happened then was that a bit later, then he says, I want to marry you. He proposed, and she basically said yes, but you've got to get Daddy's permission. And Elrond said, well, only when you're the king of Arnor and Gondor. We'll come on to that bit of it a little bit later. But do you... that one could say, in terms of his character development, that this could actually have made him more, hang on a moment, king of Arnor and Gondor. That's like even more impressive. Why do you think that wasn't what happened, but more, as the question here suggests, Arwen does seem to sort of ground him?
Good question. Well, some people think that Arwen, the Elrond's words about Arwen kind of give Aragorn greater motivation for becoming the king, but I don't think that's really the case. I think obviously it's a good thing that if he manages to succeed, then he's going to win the hand of Arwen, but I've always read those passages with Arwen as it's more about Elrond. He's given him this task, but he's already resigned himself to the two of them being together, because Arwen has said, like, when they first meet, it's basically like a love at first sight thing, and Arwen is said to have already made her choice, and I think that I've forgotten the question. What was the question? Too busy talking about Arwen.
Well, that's fine. So, pardon me. When Elrond says this, you've got to go off and do this big thing, but he seems to stay grounded. Is this Elrond's? Is this Arwen's influence over him? Do you think?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any indication that Aragorn needed to be grounded. It seems like he's, as soon as Elrond has told him his lineage and thrown this huge weight on his shoulders, Aragorn seems to almost take it in his stride. And I think obviously it would help with the relationship with Arwen, but I don't think Arwen changed his personality that much. I think his personality would draw Arwen to him. He doesn't change it because of her. I think he's still just being true to himself. I don't think he needed to be grounded. He wasn't going to rush in to do anything. He's still got that responsibility. He still leaves Rivendell to go questing for years. That's still the most important thing. And I think it helps that Arwen understands that, but I don't think, in my own opinion, that Arwen changed him like that. But I'd be interested to hear if that is how you've read that relationship.
I mean, I don't know if I have. There's an interesting comment from the hero in the chat saying Arwen gives him strength to overcome Sauron by telling him he isn't his ancestor and giving him her love. I mean, that's certainly something in the films that I think they do emphasize this. And this, again, this is something we will come back to because we've got a question about it, but this is something that the films added in, was this uncertainty on Aragorn's part. Should I become king? Should I go down this route? What about if I'm just like Isildur? And I understand why they did that, but at the same time, that is a lot more in the films than in the books. So I do absolutely. I'm very happy with the idea that the love of a good elf did ground him. I think that that's absolutely fine, and I think added this kind of long-term perspective to who he was.
Okay. Yeah.
But I don't think it's necessarily a sort of a direct. Without her, he would have been completely different.
I'm quite sure that I know that at the Council of Elrond in the books, it's actually Aragorn that says that. I know in the film that Arwen says you're the heir of Isildur, not Isildur himself. It's actually Aragorn that tells everyone else that at the council. He's well aware of it, but what you said there about the love of an elf who's old is going to would maybe be around for a while if she didn't make that choice. I think that's a good point. Actually, I hadn't thought of that one.
Yep, and so picking up in the chat when you talked about Aragorn taking something in his stride, which I picked up on as well. I was waiting for you to go afterwards,
I like my
puns. But you so somehow managed to avoid that one. Okay, let's go back to a question from one of my patrons. And this is linked in with this. This is Shar saying, "Hi Robert, hope all is well. Is the reason Aragorn looks for the kingship the fact that it is his birthright, or is there a specific thing he wanted to improve? If not, what distinguishes him from a stubborn old ox like Stannis?" Which is obviously a link across to Game of Thrones. But do you this sort of like takes it back to this slightly more esoteric view of what Tolkien thought of as good government. I think this is where this is coming from, is that was there something that Aragorn thought, I want to become king because I want to do these particular things to make the world a better place, or did he just think that's my divine right?
I think it's kind of like asking why is Gandalf wise? I think Aragorn's kingly personality, he's the way he runs towards the destiny, not away from it, is a part of him. This is his character. So it's kind of strange to ask if he's doing it because it's a birthright. He's just like Elrond. He knows that the world's at a certain point, and he knows that Gondor is going to be affected by this war one way or another, and that he wants to obviously help its people and usher in that new age, that age of men that we hear about, that Gandalf helps bring in as well, as like a steward of Middle Earth, so we view it. I think Aragorn knows that someone needs to take charge, that this is the time to defeat Sauron. This is why Isildur's Banes come forward, the sword's been reforged, and it's not all just for birthright. It's part of who he is. That's his very character. Like I say, it's just like Gandalf is is wise. Aragorn probably couldn't explain why he wants to be king. It'd be strange to imagine him not aiming for that to happen. It's his destiny. That word again. That's
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think it's not so much that he wants to be king. I think he probably never had this time of sitting down. So, do I really want this? But I think he thinks that this is what he has to do. I think he sees this as just this is what fate has brought me. The people need this in order to to save Middle Earth. This is my role in it, and I think that he had the humility with that to be looking at it and not just as a because I'm the greatest and I have to be doing all these things, otherwise nobody else can do this. I think he just thinks, no, this is my role. That doesn't make me any more important than what Frodo's doing or what Sam's doing or what Pippin's doing. And I think that is what comes out through this. The question did make this, I think it was a slightly tongue-in-cheek reference across to Stannis in A Song of Ice and Fire, who, as a character, for those who aren't as au fait with A Song of Ice and Fire, you may well have seen the TV show. He is just very stubborn in that he thinks that he is the heir. He's probably right on one sort of way of looking at it, and so he's just going to do the right thing, which he thinks just means that means that I'm king, therefore I'm going to have to fight and become king, and there's no other way around this. It's a slightly different feel in that Aragorn he has the humility to go with it, and there's a sort of a fate element that he is buying into, whereas Stannis, whereas he has people like Melisandre saying, "Oh, there's these prophecies around you. You are Azor Ahai reborn." Stannis, at least to start with, is very much like, this is useful. This might help me get back what I think I should have. It's not that he's there thinking in a kind of non-self-centered way. I just think this is a thing that I ought to be doing.
Would if Aragorn was like that, he'd probably have did what we were talking about earlier, where he would just go to Gondor and try and take the throne. He wouldn't wait decades and earn it if that was his attitude. So
exactly, yeah. So this would have been a very different A Song of Ice and Fire if Stannis had said, "Yeah, I probably am the rightful king, but what I really need to do now is to go around and understand this land that I'm going to be governing and spend the next however many years heading off." I think it's probably about 60 years all in all, when you're sort of heading off and around and about and exploring things. So, yes, it would have been very different, and I think he is a very different character to Stannis. Let's go to question from Mara Lee saying, how was Aragorn able to live and rule for 122 years? Was it because he had some elven blood passed down to him? This is an interesting question. Actually, I picked up on something in the chat. I didn't see who it was who was asking, why are Númenóreans so tall? So I think I'll put this one to you, Stephen. Is this because, as we've said, they come from this line that Elros was there? Are they elvish? Is this what makes them Númenóreans slightly different to other humans?
Yeah, it's this idea in Tolkien's mind of it's a physical representation of how would you call it, like nobility. Mm-hmm. Nobility. The taller you are physically, it's really daunting thing straight away. It's like it can be like a majestic kind of presence. It's the first thing you see. So I think it's not a surprise that when you go all the way back to the first age, the really, the heroic men of that age, you're always describing them as, they're always talked about as being tall. That's one of the first things that Tolkien speaks of, and that's before we're talking about the men of Númenor with the Elros connection. So we're talking about even in the first stage, they're tall. It's to do with nobility. But I don't know what you think about that. Why you think all the best men throughout the history of Middle Earth are all described as being enormous. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, and also some of the best women. Galadriel is
Yeah.
notably, she's mentioned as being tall. I think, and Elendil the Tall. That was what he was called.
Yeah,
This
he
is
was huge.
Isildur's father.
Was he not? If I think,
I think it was
I can't remember
seven
the.
feet, maybe.
Yeah,
It was either
there's a
7 or 8 feet. He
yeah, he's
was
taller.
supposed to be. Yeah.
I think because Tolkien uses this measurement. I can't remember it offhand, but it basically says, "Oh, Elendil would be 8 foot or something like that," and it's quite hard to imagine.
It is. It is. So yeah, they are massive, and I think there is an element here. I agree with you completely. I think that the height thing is what you're talking about. I think the age thing is that's an elf blood thing as well. But also, incidentally, that line also has Maya blood in it as well. If you go back up to a few generations before Elrond and Elros, so it's there's a lot of sort of eternal living beings whose bloodline feeds on down through that. But yeah, with the height thing, I think you're right. I think that Tolkien does use this, but I think he also likes to subvert this a bit, because then you get both Morgoth and Sauron are, when they take on their hideous forms, they are massive, they are tall, and this is certainly something. Is this the kind of the mockery kind of thing idea? Is that they are just trying to be like what an imposing figure would be, a majestic ruling lordly character would be like, perhaps? But I think Tolkien, he's often, from people who haven't read all the books, he's often sort of characterized as somebody who is, the good characters all look nice and the bad characters all look nasty and orcish, but actually there's an extra layer there that he does try and subvert this quite a bit, and some of the best characters, as we know, are the shortest characters, and so what makes somebody great and lordly is both, these are the people that we literally and figuratively look up to, but also maybe we shouldn't forget the people who are not quite as tall.
Do you think before you move on there, you were talking about the living so long to do with the elvish blood, but we know that Aragorn, he lives even longer than those he descended from, who would also share that blood. So do you think there's some sort of what the Númenóreans were blessed with, we'd probably call it divine grace or something like that, where they started to fail, with the downfall, when they started to distrust the Valar and fear death, and then mingling with what was called the lesser men of Middle Earth. So that started to happen. But then Aragorn, he's pretty much like a throwback to the early kings of Númenor. So is it a surprise that he would live so much longer, because he's pretty much blessed? And I think it's maybe more than just who they descend from, because in that case, his father and his father and his father, they would, well, I know some were killed, but technically they could live for a really long time as well. So I don't know if you think it's to do with just the blood, or this kind of grace that they've been given.
I think it is, and it is to do with the grace, and I think that's a really interesting word you use there. And I think that there's also an element, particularly when you're getting into the Third Age, heading into the Fourth Age, when I talked about this kind of era of imagination, age of imagination that Tolkien describes in his stories as being within. And when we get into the Fourth Age, after the story of the Lord of the Rings, then we do kind of get this sort of petering out, almost of like his interest in what was going on. And then there was, they had a son, and then there were more sons after that, and then it sort of carried on. And the implication is that each of those lived slightly less long lives, and they became slightly less ethereal, the world became slightly less magic as time went on. So it was almost like like he hits this sort of like, okay, here is now the new founding father of the Dominion of Man. This is Aragorn and Elisar, and from him will flow down each generation. Like if you ever read the book of Genesis, when you get the ancient patriarchs, it seems like each generation, the oldest one lived to like 900 and something years, then each generation seems to live slightly less. And that's the kind of feel I think that Tolkien is going for here, is that the patriarch lives a long time, and then each generation a little bit of the magic. We're moving closer and closer to our own kind of world. So yeah, I think that sort of grace, I think, is a really interesting word, and I think it's one that Tolkien would himself very much recognize.
Same with that. Just before I finish there, there's that world weirdness as well, where Aragorn chooses when he dies. So it seems like you say, it's a good way you put it, where the Dominion of Men's come in. He's the first king. He has to lead them for a while. He can't just like bring it around and then die really quickly. It's as if he's been blessed with not becoming weary of the world until he's actually ready to go and leave it to other people. I don't know if that maybe plays a part as well. That's again harkening back to the early kings of Numenor.
It is who, and it's slightly different, but there they had this fantastic way that they reigned until they gave it up, not until they died, and they sort of gave it up while they were still strong and compos mentis and great and good, passed it on to their successor, and then they had their nice little retirement, which is died usually quite soon afterwards, and it's almost like okay, now it's time to give it up, and that's definitely the feel we get with Aragorn, even if it's not exactly the same. It's definitely the feel we get going on there. A couple of questions from the chat. Vince Staple, thank you very much, saying thoughts on Aragorn's character change, heading Mouth of Sauron at the Black Gate in the third Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings film. Yeah, I remember some controversy at the time. It was so in the books. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but in the books you get this epic confrontation. Aragorn is leading the last bit of the army up. They go to the Black Gate. The Mouth of Sauron comes out. They have this confrontation, and the confrontation is almost like a mental one. It would appear. They do talk, but then they have this kind of mental battle, and then the Mouth of Sauron kind of leaps back and says, "Don't do that to me. I'm an ambassador. You know, I'm a diplomatic immunity," or words to that effect, implying that Aragorn has sort of attacked him mentally in some way, which is never fully explained. But what happened in the movies, in the film, was Aragorn did. Again, I can't remember exactly the context, but he did cut off his head. I didn't particularly like that at the time, and I didn't find it necessary. But what were your thoughts about that? Do you think that changes his character?
Yeah, it's completely against the idea of Aragorn. It's something that the Mouth of Sauron would do to someone else, or Sauron would do, or his servants. It's like I think you would use the word craven for something like that. It's, even though the Mouth of Sauron's horrible, he's evil, he's mocking them, Aragorn's meant to be above that. He's meant to be a king, and he would treat an ambassador as an ambassador, even if he was one as evil as the Mouth of Sauron. So, like you say, he defeats the Mouth of Sauron just by looking at him, showing that he's not going to be daunted. That's something that Tolkien uses a lot, this idea that you could mentally overcome someone. And Aragorn does it. It's not violent, but he's letting the Mouth of Sauron know, no, your lies aren't going to work here. And the Mouth of Sauron's afraid. And I think that's such a great confrontation in the book. I love that whole section with the Mouth of Sauron, and it was ruined just for a cheap beheading that I think it completely changes Aragorn's character, and there was no need to put it in. The way it happens in the book is a lot more interesting, and They could have pulled that off in the film, and like I say, I think it was just a cheap kind of shock moment that didn't need to be there.
Actually, I think I have. No, I did. I thought I had the quote up a moment ago. Here we go. This is what it said. This is when Aragorn is doing, as I called it, like the mental battle. Though Aragorn did not stir nor move hand to weapon, the other quailed and gave back. The other here being the mouth of Sauron. The other quailed and gave back as if menaced with a blow. I am a herald and an ambassador, and may not be assailed, he cried. Where such laws hold, said Gandalf. It is also the custom for ambassadors to use less insolence, but no one has threatened you. You have naught to fear from us. So that, if you just take it, that this is implicitly from Gandalf saying, yeah, there are some rules of war that everybody understands, and ambassadors have a role and they are protected, and therefore, no, we're not attacking you. So I think we're in agreement on this one. It did change the whole feel there of Aragorn actually being beneath his kingly station to chop off the head of someone that he didn't have to chop off the head of. Okay, let's go to another question. This is from Songbird saying, why did Aragorn faint when he picked up the Palantir? You just break. I don't know whether this is just me. You seem to be breaking up a little bit at the moment, Stephen. Is that might be your connection? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. You've been last couple of minutes. You were kind of getting pixelated, but
apologies for that. If you're watching and one or both of us are being pixelated, it may be my internet connection. Who knows? It was certainly a bit dodgy during the storms a few days ago. But do you have an answer to on this one on the Palantir? Why might Aragorn faint on picking up a Palantir?
That's the movie, isn't it? Does he not? Does he not react when Sauron shows him Arwen in the Palantir?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of strain when using it, certainly.
Oh yeah, definitely. So I think in the books we know that we don't actually see the confrontation with Sauron, but Tolkien's clear that Sauron is more than proficient at battles of will, and even though Aragorn was the rightful owner of that stone, I think Tolkien used the de jure king of Gondor. He's by rights he can wield it. He still has to take it from Sauron, and we see Aragorn's reaction when he tells Gandalf that he's looked into the stone, and it's been a great mental battle. Even though it's his by right, he still has to overcome Sauron, who is legendary when it comes to this thing. So everyone that speaks with Sauron through a Palantir is mentally affected afterwards, and Aragorn's no different.
Yeah, and if you're interested in Palantiri, then there's a fantastic essay on this in Book of Unfinished Tales, where it sets out Christopher Tolkien, who obviously was fantastic. He pulls together all of these different things that Tolkien, his father, wrote, and we get a really clear understanding what it's. And it is a mental battle. You have to struggle to control this. It's only the strong-willed who can actually really properly use it and bend it to their will. And so Aragorn, in looking at this, he not only it's his first time doing this. Yes, technically this might be his by rights, but this is his first time attempting this, and he's coming right up against Sauron, a Maya who has been using this for ages. So there's a reason why this is a struggle for Aragorn. The Palantiri, when we say that it's his by right, they were brought back from Numenor by Elendil and Isildur, And so they were brought into Middle-earth, and then there were 7 of them, and they were distributed about. So there were sort of 3 in the south, 3 in the north, and 1 sort of in the middle in Orthanc, and that's the Orthanc stone. And so as Aragorn is the heir to both kingdoms, he owns them. Basically, they are his. So that's what we mean when we say it is his by his birthright. But most of them by that point had been disappeared or destroyed. There were still another couple sort of lying around.
I think that's why Sauron, he's only able to use it in certain ways. He's basically tainting it by using it, and Aragorn would be able to use the Palantir, theoretically in a far more proficient way than Sauron could, because it's his to use. But Sauron's able to, use deceit and cheat his way to kind of using it in a way to his advantage. So that's what he's been doing for years.
Yeah, absolutely. Picklander, thank you very much, saying just want to send some love and support. Thanks for all you do. Thank you very much indeed. We did. It seems like it was me and then you and then me again on the pixelation, but I think we're back to being okay again. So it might be both of our internet connections. But anyway, I'll just use this quick pause to just to say what I say every single time. Patrons, thank you. This is the reason why I prioritize my patrons' questions, is that I cannot do what I do without your support. I cannot devote the time that I do without your support over on Patreon. If you do want to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. I don't know, Stephen, have you got you only recently new to this game, have you got a Patreon or any ways for people to support you in this?
I do have Patreon. I think it's a month or 2 old now, and I think one of your mods has kindly shared it in the chat as well, so thanks very much for that.
Good. Well, Patreon, I always say, is for many creators, not just me and Stephen, but many creators, is the best way to support a creator that you love. So if there's someone out there that you think, actually, you know what, I just want to help them do what they do, then please do go and check out Patreon. That's my little plug for them. Okay, let's go across to a question from one of my patrons. Sea Green Mango, how much did Aragorn know about the ring before the story we see in The Lord of the Rings? This can be a general question too. In the films, everyone seems to know the backstory, but in the books, there's much more mystery, even for the characters with the most knowledge and wisdom. So we've sort of touched on this a little bit, I think, already, Stephen, but at what point do you think Aragorn really understood what was going on here with the ring?
So I can't believe I've never thought of that question. It's actually a really good question. I think even Aragorn would have secrets held from him for a while, because we know that Elrond tells him about his lineage, but there's no mention at all of Elrond telling him about what Isildur's Bane actually is. And we know that Aragorn is waiting for a sign about Isildur's Bane being revealed, but Tolkien keeps using that term for it. He's never saying the One Ring. So I don't know if it's maybe really close to the time of The Lord of the Rings where Aragorn is actually told about this, because we know that he meets Gandalf, if I remember right, it's 2956 or something like that. It's quite late in proceedings. And I think Gandalf would probably be the one to tell him, but I've never read anywhere where he learned of it or when he learned of it. I would assume it was around that time when they met Gollum, and Gandalf has to explain what the hell that creature is and why he's like that. That's probably a good time to bring up the ring, but it could have been earlier. But I don't think Tolkien actually told us. So I probably have to think a bit about that.
No, I mean, I think you're right. Tolkien didn't tell us explicitly. I think that's good memory. I think it is 2956 that he met Gandalf. And at this point after that, yes, I think he was. Gandalf brought him into his confidence. Gandalf obviously knew who he was, and I think as Gandalf had this way, he did very probably have this feeling that Aragorn was going to be important in what was going to be happening. So I think that he trusted him from quite early on. And as I said, but they did have this 16, 17-year search for Gollum, and Gandalf will, I'm sure, have told Aragorn why they're searching for Gollum, because this was the point at which Gandalf is starting to get his suspicions. We've got Bilbo who's come back, and in the films they squashed it right down, but in the books there is a very long period of time when Bilbo's happily sat there in the Shire, not getting any older, and so this is when Gandalf starts getting his suspicions, and he starts reading up about stuff, and he comes to this conclusion that the missing link is Gollum. Where did Gollum get this ring from? How on earth did it get from it being with Isildur to ending up with Gollum? So that was the point at which he and Gandalf and Aragorn went out looking for Gollum, and I think that Aragorn will have been told by that point. So I think he knew. I suspect growing up in Rivendell, then he will have known the ancient lore of what happened in the history of the world. I'm sure that when he was at the age of 21, he was told his history. Then I'm sure that will have come in with this idea of who was Isildur, and he had the ring and those kinds of things. I'm sure that all happened. But where the ring is, that'll be Gandalf who makes those links, would be my guess.
Yeah, because that's a good point, because when he gets given these shards of Narsil, he has to, unless he'd already been told, he couldn't have. Elrond would have to tell him, because he was raised in Rivendell. He'd have to explain probably the War of the Last Alliance, and he's not just going to hand over the sword and say, keep this safe. So,
yes.
I don't know, it's you could probably make an argument that Elrond must have told him something about it, but I agree with you. I think maybe Gandalf was the one, when his suspicions were right, he shared that information with Aragorn. I would agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where we're not told explicitly, but it kind of makes sense if it was along those lines. As you say, it would be really weird of Elrond to say, and here's this broken sword, which is your birthright, full stop, without then giving the history. And I'm sure Aragorn will have known some of the history. We are told in a rather intriguing, just like, oh, by the way, he missed the last White Council meeting. This is Aragorn, because he was out in the wild. So when the great and the good, Galadriel and Elrond and Gandalf and Saruman, gathered together to have their last White Council meeting, Aragorn wasn't there. So he missed out on any discussions that happened in that meeting about it. But Gandalf, after that, definitely will be really focused in on where is this ring, as Saruman was as well. Okay, let's go to a question from this was the question actually we were going to come to a while ago, but with why Elrond, I sort of trailed it really. Why did Elrond forbid Aragorn from marrying his daughter, and why did he withhold the scepter of Numenor from him until Aragorn was able to take the throne? So there's lots of different angles you can take on this one, but why is it? What's your take? I'll give my take in just a moment. I'm sure I won't disagree with you. I shall add a little bit to it. Why did Elrond do this? He could see that Aragorn and Arwen were in love. He knew that Arwen wanted to marry Aragorn, and then he gives them this very hard thing to do. You must become the king, not only of this kingdom which is been destroyed, but also this kingdom that explicitly has rejected your forefathers having any right to rule. So why did he do that?
Well, I wouldn't agree with the question saying that it was forbidden. Like you say, he was given given this task, which is really a callback to the quest for the Silmaril with Beren and Luthien. It's been given the greatest task that's possible to win the hand of someone who only deserves the best of their kindred, basically. So it's like earning the right. But because we know that Arwen is called the Even Star, and Tolkien says she shares the character, the looks, and the fate of Luthien, who we describe as the Morning. So she's basically like the last result of like the beauty of elves in Middle Earth, and she's the last gleam of light, you could probably say, and only the very best would be able to marry her. And we know that Aragorn has this, we've talked about it earlier, this birthright. He can hardly be distracted by getting married. So it's like, I think Elrond gives him this task, hoping that, you know, even though he'll be sad to lose Arwen, he's already given, he's kind of given up because he knows they're in love. He knows they're wanting to be together. He's given him this task that will make Aragorn realise that he's now worthy of her. And I still think he's, to himself, secretly hoping that he'll manage it. I don't think he gave him the task to say, because I know you'll never be able to do this. He calls Aragorn his son in that conversation. He loves Aragorn, he wants him to do it. But Arwen, based on who she represents in the whole race of elves, will only deserve the best of mankind, and Aragorn has to do this to show that he is the best. So I don't think it's about forbidding, it's letting Aragorn know just how important this will be, and that's the only task that he can give him that's worthy of that. That's how I read that.
Yeah, I think there's a fantastic. You mentioned the echo there of the story of Beren and Luthien, which I've been listening to that just now. It's the audiobook, the Lord of the Rings audiobook that I've been going through right now. But that is fascinating because there is clearly, Tolkien makes the echo. He wants us to see it. Not only is this, yes, this is a man, a mortal man and an immortal elf falling in love, but he even says Aragorn was there and he was like singing the song about Beren and Luthien meeting when he met Arwen. So he's clearly wanting us to see this link between the two. But I think there's a clear difference in my mind, particularly when I've been listening to it again. Thingol, who was Luthien's father, the elf king there, he sets this challenge to Beren. He says, yes, you can marry my daughter as long as you steal a Silmaril for me. And it is deliberately a ridiculous thing. Yep. Because the Silmaril is not only being held by Morgoth, who's like the biggest, baddest, nastiest person ever, but in his fortress, which is nobody can assail it. It's been besieged for hundreds of years, and nobody can get in or out. And it's not just lying around. He's actually got it on the crown on his head. So it's like, this is impossible. And the people in the court literally laugh at this idea. That Beren might go away and do it. And Beren doesn't quite seem to get the joke. And he says, okay, then I'll go off and do that. But there's the clear, I think, Tolkien is showing a clear difference between what happened there, where Thingol thought, you're not going to do this. I don't want you to marry my daughter. And what's happening here with Elrond, who I think he thought he would do this. He actively wanted Aragorn to do it, but he just wanted to sort of show a sort of yes, you have to be worthy, and I think you will be at this point in time in the future. So I think it's an echo that we're shown, but it's a reversing of it. Elrond wanted his daughter to marry Aragorn.
Do you think Elrond maybe he obviously knows the story of Beren and Luthien? Do you think he had that in mind when he? No, you're saying exactly what I thought, that it was given to Beren and kind of in the hope that he wouldn't achieve it, but if he did, I get a Silmaril out of it. But he was kind of giving him an impossible task. Do you think you're saying this echoes? Do you think Elrond, no, had a different mindset where it has to be something as great as that, but I think this man can achieve it because of someone like Beren. The impossible for like the things that these characters are doing for love is the impossible can happen to achieve that. Do you think Elrond was maybe thinking like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think absolutely. I think what I was just trying to work through my brain as well just there was the fact that the reason that Beren managed to get the Silmaril was actually, yeah, he did good himself, but it was actually that Luthien came in and did most of the hard work herself. So this is not a story of like this heroic man who goes off and completes this mission, which is the way that it's set up. This is actually this woman actively wants to go off and marry him, so she's going to go out there, she's going to use her magic, she's going to sneak into places, she's going to befriend the greatest dog ever known to humanity apart from my own dog Dan. This is what's going to happen, and it's going to be down to her. But Arwen doesn't play that role, interestingly, in The Lord of the Rings. She doesn't play this sort of role of taking over the reins from Aragorn. It is actually Aragorn can do it, even though this is a ridiculous task. So yeah, it's a huge show of faith, I think, by Elrond, rather than a laughing at him and just saying, no, you're never going to do this. Mara Lee, actually, I just saw you did a super chat saying, just a show of love and support. You are the best. Love to Dan the dog. Thank you very much. We were just talking through one of your questions, actually, just there. And Dan the dog, nearly as good a dog as Huan, the hound, has to be said. Reflective rambling. Thank you so much. Picking up a question for someone. I love it when you do this. Thank you. It's very kind. 22 Boogies. Is there anything to be read into Shadowfax choosing Gandalf and not Aragorn? Did Aragorn ever seek a Miras steed? Well, I think Shadowfax chose Gandalf because Gandalf chose Shadowfax, is my take. But I don't know off the top of my head. Are we told anything? He clearly had a horse, Aragorn, when he was in Rohan. But I don't think he specifically chose any special horse. I think that when he was there, he was in a way not trying to draw too much attention to himself. I mean, have you got a take on that?
No, I think it would probably be mentioned because there's all that drama about Gandalf picking Shadowfax. We hear all about it when they show up at the court and Grima Wormtongue is saying Gandalf was insolent for taking Shadowfax. And then even when Gandalf pretty much saves Theoden and brings him back from the brink, he's told, no, you can have anything. And he's saying, give me Shadowfax with your blessing. And it even seems at that time that Theoden's a little apprehensive about it, and he's like, yeah, okay, I did say you could take what you want. And I think if Aragorn had tried or had succeeded in doing that as well, it would be mentioned. Plus, Tolkien would probably mention it as one of those other horses that rides with Shadowfax, but he doesn't. He just highlights the uniqueness of Shadowfax and how all the other horses basically hearken to him as well. So I think it's a good idea, but I don't think there's anything in the text that would hint at that.
No, there isn't. And I think he also had, so I think his horse, he has a few different horses in the books. He has one which someone in the chat pointed this one out. The Grey Company, who I was talking about a little bit earlier, they bring. Oh yes, so Frederick Hecht saying the Grey Company brought his horse from the north. Yes, his horse, whose name was something like Roheris, perhaps not 100% sure, but was given to him by Arwen. So this was his horse, and they brought it down. So he then used that horse from then on. But before that, he'd been loaned a horse by Eomer. He does have a sort of a horsey history, so to speak, but we don't see him having a specific horse that's sort of as legendary as Shadowfax. And the point, I think, with Shadowfax is that Gandalf needed to have Shadowfax. It wasn't just a matter of this would be quite nice, I want to have a cool horse. If you look at the timelines, the only way he could get all the different places he needed to get to was by a horse that went ridiculously fast. And so he needed to have Shadowfax, and so that was probably a part of why that actually worked.
There's also there's a quote, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it talks about when Aragorn has his horse, that mentions him using the saddle, and if all the Meras are like Shadowfax, then he wouldn't need a saddle if he was riding one of them. So that could maybe be a clue that it's maybe a great horse, but not that great a horse. Shadowfax is special.
Shadowfax is absolutely special. And in the chat, someone was saying, so Kugel Bits was saying, it's just a plot device, I think. Gandalf needed a fast horse to get around. I mean, I think that, yes, he did need a fast horse to get around, so it is a plot device. But as we know, Tolkien built a whole world. He didn't create this race of incredibly fast and amazing horses just so that he could have one for Gandalf. This was just part of the world that was there, and Gandalf made use of that. Let's go to another question from my patrons. Catherine Fursith saying, "Hi Robert, is there an intentional direction in Aragorn's life story? His life seems to have an almost shaggy dog feel to it before finding his purpose in taking the mantle of kingship, or is this unfair? To me, up until a point in time, his intention is to contribute to do good in this world, which he does, but when did he actually decide to fulfill his destiny to lead? Thanks as always." I mean, I'll kick this one off, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, Stephen, because I think that this sort of ties in a few of the things that we've been talking already. Is that the idea of Aragorn being this reluctant king is very much a movie thing, a film thing. In the books, that isn't really a part of his character. But he is patient in terms of how he comes to reach the goal that he's heading towards becoming king. And so what we have, I think, is, you say it's a shaggy dog story. Yes, it is, in the fact that he seems to sort of roam all around the land. But I think that is the point. This is him spending time up in the sort of the northwest, up around the former kingdom of Arnor, around the Shire, spending time in Rohan, spending time in Gondor, going down even further to the south and to the east. This is, and then we sort of hear of him sort of coming back up again through sort of around Lothlorien and Mirkwood. This is him understanding the world. This isn't just a random sort of selection of places that he went off to. This is him sort of going off in the world. And you did, I think you quoted this earlier, but what we're told is that he went specifically exploring the hearts of men, good and evil, and learning about the plots and devices of the servants of the Dark Lord, which is... it shows an intent on his part. This wasn't him just randomly heading off and having some adventures. He actively wanted to go off and discover some things. So what's your take in terms of sort of the intentionality of Aragorn's story pre-Lord of the Rings?
I think everything you said spot on. It's we talked about that earlier. It's meeting friends and foes. He's not just leaving Rivendell and getting thrown straight into the War of the Ring. He spends a great deal of time learning about Middle-earth, and I think one thing that's maybe not been covered is his appearance. We have to remember that he's supposed to be a secret. they can't reveal who he is yet. So a lot of his story is waiting for the right time, which is when we start reading Lord of the Rings. That's the right time. So he's got a very secretive existence. No one outside of the wise or the rangers really know who he truly is. So he's basically wandering around Middle Earth, learning about it, learning about its inhabitants, and he's basically kind of doing what Gandalf was doing. He's making friends in all these different places, and when the time is right, that'll pay off. I think that's what we get when the Lord of the Rings starts. So I don't know about we're talking about like the Shaggy Dog story, and that it's all for a purpose, which we see pay off in the story itself.
Yes, I agree. And it's not a plot device in order to show us why Aragorn understood the world, the route from Bree over to Rivendell. This is him as a character understanding these things, because of course that's what he would be doing. If he was wanting to be a good king, he had to understand this land that he was going to be ruling over. Which does bring us to this was another question from one of your subscribers, and we've been sort of working our way around this, so I think we can probably now answer this one sort of head on. Soulsborne13 says Peter Jackson changed Aragorn to become reluctant, almost being forced into accepting his history. Do you like this change, and do you think it needed to happen to give Aragorn some character development in the trilogy? So I think I know what you're going to say on this one, Stephen, but what's your take on this?
Well, I think you said when the stream started that you talked about the character development for Aragorn, and I'm glad you said that, because it seems in a lot of talk about the movies, people seem to think this change had to happen because Aragorn, when we meet him in the Fellowship of the Ring, is exactly the same as the Aragorn at the end of the story, and I don't understand how anyone could think that, but I understand completely why they did it in the film, but that's not to say that if they'd actually stuck to what Tolkien had written, that wouldn't have worked. Aragorn's not reluctant, but those moments where, when Gandalf has fallen and he's suddenly thrust into that leadership position, we really see a lot of development for Aragorn there. He doubts himself at that point. He doubts the choices he's made. He delays making really important decisions about where the Fellowship should go. And when we get to Boromir's death and the Uruk-hai taking Merry and Pippin, he's at quite a low point at that time, and then we see him recover from that in the Two Towers, and then I think in the Return of the King he's a completely different character. That's when he's almost, I don't want to say abandoned Strider, because he obviously adopts that as a name when he becomes king, but he's now Aragorn. His sword is carried around. He's not going to sheathe it again until the end of the war. He's not the ranger anymore. He's going to be the king of Gondor. And I think they could have shown that in the film. And I'm not necessarily a fan of the reluctant Aragorn of the films, but it still did work. I think they still did write him, quite well, but I wish I could see Aragorn as Tolkien had written him.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that completely. And there are some kind of nuances to the character that I think show quite a lot of what his leadership was like. So you talked about him in the movies. He was quite uncertain about where to go after Gandalf had gone, and it's almost like should we go to Minas Tirith? Should we go there? I'm not entirely sure. And in the books, it's very clear that his decision is that he thinks Frodo should decide. He has actually made a decision. It's not that he's just like uncertain about what to do. He personally would actually quite like to go to Minas Tirith, because that's where he knows he's heading at some point anyway, because he has to go there. But he has made a decision that this is up to Frodo, and that is a very different thing to sort of I'm not 100% sure where we should go. My overall take, and I shall go off I do an occasional mini rant about dwarves and as they're treated in adaptations of
Go for
Tolkien. Gimli is woefully treated in the Peter Jackson films, in my humble opinion, in that Gimli as a character, they generally used him in the films as being sort of like almost a comedy character. There's huge amounts of height jokes. There's huge amounts of jokes about his eating and drinking habits, things like that. Actually, when you get into the books, you'll find Gimli as a character. He's an incredibly noble character, and he goes through this huge amount of character change in a way that the films simply did not seem to pick up on. When you think about what it is that he starts off, he goes through the mines of Moria, this great, the legendary place for him, and he finds the remnants of what had happened to his people, and that hugely affects him. And then he's forced to go into Lothlorien, where he's basically treated as being completely different to all of the rest of them, and yet he still goes through and seems to not judge them in the way that they judged him. He's incredibly fearful of Fangorn, but he goes in there anyway. He keeps on coming up against these things that naturally he's been brought up to dislike or find suspicious, and he goes ahead and does this anyway, and he ends up being fast friends with Legolas. And that for me is a huge character journey that they decided to miss out on in the films, which I understand a lot of the and I'm as big a fan of the movies as anyone else is. I understand why they did it, but it feels as if they took away some of this character development. The same goes for some characters like Merry and Pippin. They took away some of the character development there, which meant that they felt that they had to push someone into some other places. That's my kind of feel. And so it's like, well, we can't have all of these characters staying exactly the same all this time. We need to have some characters who sort of grow and change. So that's why they pushed a little bit more onto Aragorn. Just my personal feeling, and probably is more to do with my dislike of how dwarves are always treated on screen, and I suspect will be treated in the same way. Again, I'm sorry, I'm off on a rant now, guys. I apologize. I do this sometimes. When one of the things from the Rings of Power, I'm still very much looking forward to it, but just one of those things that rings a little bell, makes you go, what? When some of the promo materials. The very few things we've learned about them is that the dwarves are having a rock breaking competition. That doesn't sound to me like they're treating the dwarves with the respect that they're due. But anyway, I digress.
Are they all going to be Scottish as well? That tends to be a trope. It's
I have no idea.
Scottish or Scottish accent.
Well, I mean, I don't know whether clearly your fine beard you would fit well in with the dwarves. It was noted in the chat earlier, it has to be said, but I don't know. I think the person who's playing Durin, whichever Durin they're having in there, is Owain Arthur, who is Welsh. So whether he is going to stick with his own accent or go with something else, I do not know. But no, perhaps they will break free from the Scottish dwarves.
I think the other Durin that they're bringing in is Scottish. He's the guy from Train Spotting, quite famous up here. But also, remember John Rhys Davies. His accent's kind of Scottish as Gimli. I think it's an attempt.
It is a bit, yeah, and he obviously is Welsh himself. No, I'm now intrigued by the dude from Train Spotting. This is clearly not Ewan McGregor. Which dude are we talking about?
Oh, he's quite famous up here, and I completely forgot his name. Let me just
not to worry.
Find him.
Well, you do that. I will move on. I think, did we get something else in the chat? Yes. So here we go. Geeking with James Hancock. Hi there, James. Friend of the channel. Excellent person. Saying, as two individuals sporting facial hair, which character from Tolkien lore has the best beard? Which character has the best beard? Well, the Longbeards as a whole tend to have pretty impressive beards. This is Durin's folk. I will have a think about that when if Stephen, have you found out who this actor is?
Peter Millen, that's the actor.
Ah,
If
excellent.
if you go and find him, it's one of these ones that you, when you see his face, you're like, oh, I know him from a few things. He's one of those actors. So, but he's definitely Scottish. So, and he's playing Durin as well.
Excellent. Okay, so facial hair. Who's got the best beard in the world of Tolkien? I mean, I've thought of one while you're thinking about that, and it's not so much that the beard itself is anything spectacular. It's the uniqueness of the beard. We have the elf with the beard, Círdan, and this is beards. Obviously, a sign of great longevity and wisdom, as we all know, and Círdan being the wisest and most far-sighted of the elves, he has a beard. So I would probably vote for that one. But have you got a favorite beard?
No, but I know that with Kieran, I'm always interested if you talk about this third stage of the life cycle and you apparently get a beard. I'm really interested if Tolkien meant him to have a really really long beard. If he's does it keep growing when you reach that stage or something like that? I don't know, but I've always just imagined I quite liked one thing about the Hobbit movies. Maybe this is the only thing. The intricate dwarven beards with the decorations and that. I think they were really good, and it's kind of changed how I perceive dwarves in the story when I read the books now. I think that's how I imagine it, and I'd have to say, not one character, but if we're talking about the best beards, you'd have to go with the dwarves, and especially the royalty amongst them. I'd assume that they would have, if beards are that important, they'd have the best beards because they're the best dwarves. It would be something like that. Maybe men get taller when they're more noble, and dwarves get bigger beards. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, it might well be. I'm just very. I mean, I think the elves. I think you're right. This is something that we very rarely see elves get old. We see them mature. That takes them about 100 years to mature. Then they have this sort of long period of being like a grown elf before they have the sort of the old sort of period, which is where we get Círdan, who probably should have gone back to Valinor, but he sort of hung around to build boats for everyone else. Peter Mullen, I'm sure I knew him from somewhere. I've just looked. I'm a big fan of Westworld, as many people sort of followed. So he was on that. James Delos, if you remember him, he did a fantastic job there as well. So James Hancock, I hope that answered your beard question. Someone in the chat did say, obviously, Tom Bombadil. So
I forgot all about him. Yeah.
Find it hard to disagree. Which reminds me, actually, always going off on digressions at this point of a live stream. This is a question I ask everybody, completely randomly, who comes on as a guest for one of my Tolkien live streams, simply because everybody's got a slightly different answer to this. Tom Bombadil. Who or what is he?
Tom Bombadil is an enigma, and that's always what I'll say. I'm one of these really annoying people that when someone comes out and says he's obviously an Ainu, he's this or that, I always just quote Tolkien saying he's an enigma, by design, and putting him into a box kind of diminishes him. He's special because we don't really know what he is, and I quite like not knowing what he is. He's completely unique, in my opinion. So I'll just say that's what he is.
Well, I'll happily go with that. As I say, everybody's got a slightly different I think everyone comes around to that as the ultimate answer we have to give, because this is what Tolkien basically said. I mean, when asked what he's there for, it's just like, I mean, I can't really put my finger on what it is, but I just know that it's important and it's necessary for my world. And so it's like, if he can't quite put into words what Tom Bombadil is, then I think probably we can't. I mean, we all have our own pet theories, I suspect, on what he probably is, but fundamentally we have to come back to the fact that Tolkien didn't tell us, and the fact that he is a mystery is part of the joy and fun of that character.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's go to. I've got about 3 more questions here from my patrons coming up, by the way. So now is a good time if you have any more questions to drop them into the chat. Got a question from Mara Lee saying, if Aragorn had not taken the throne, who would have ruled in his place? Do you have a take on this one?
Yeah, it's another one of these. I don't know if people like these kinds of answers, but I kind of take that question as when people ask if Frodo didn't take the ring, who would have taken it? It's quite hard to pick because we're coming back to this idea of destiny, and we talked earlier about there been no other claimants to the throne. It's Aragorn or no one. You know, when the kingdom of Arnor collapsed and we had those 3 kingdoms, we're told that Aragorn's coming through from Arthedain, but the other 2 kingdoms have no one at all. It's basically, as Tolkien says, Aragorn is the sole direct male descendant of the line of Elendil, and Isildur didn't renounce the throne of Gondor when he shared it with his brother. And we're basically saying that if Aragorn fails, and dies, there's no one that can rule in his stead. We're stuck with the stewards. So if Denethor is dead, as what happens in the story, Faramir would rule in Aragorn's stead. And if Denethor survived, it would be Denethor, and they would just go on hoping that a king would return who would never return. But that wouldn't happen because the whole point is that Aragorn is destined to do it, and he is going to return and take the throne. So my answer is no one except the stewards.
I think I would agree with you completely there. It's one of these things where we get in the north, as we've said, Aragorn was clearly the last of his line. There's always you can go back and you can say, well, 6 generations earlier, somebody had a sibling and then they had children, and you can find somebody there. So there's always someone next in line. But Tolkien does not tell us who that might be. The implication is that if you're just looking for the pure line down, it's Aragorn or bust. That's it. And when you get to Gondor had no king and needed no king. That was very much the rallying cry for them. Yeah. They would very much have happily carried on with their stewards all the way through. And if Denethor had died, I mean, he was a bit of a downer on Faramir, but I think Faramir was probably next in line. And then they would have carried on from there afterwards. So no one is, I think, the short answer, which is, as you say, this is just about fate. This is about the way that the story had to go.
I think we're also being maybe a bit optimistic by saying if Aragorn failed, the stewards would continue. I think if Aragorn failed, Sauron would win, and there wouldn't be any stewards either. That's how important it is that Aragorn doesn't fail. So maybe the right answer is absolutely no one, because there wouldn't be a kingdom left, probably.
Yes, I think that's probably fair. I mean, it's as much as we rush to rightly say that the real heroes of this story are the hobbits and people like that. Aragorn clearly was central to this. There's absolutely no doubt that he was. His presence and actions were necessary for everything else to happen. Chorus Ballerina thank you very much, picking up a question for 22 Boogies saying, or Boogles perhaps, saying, if Aragorn had entered Legolas and Gimli's orc slaying contest, what do you think the final score would have been for Aragorn? That's a really good question. I mean, Tolkien doesn't write in that much depth about battles. Is one of his distinctives as a writer, particularly compared to how long we see on screen a lot of battles. When you get to the Hobbit Part 3 film, then you'll see what was, I think, about 5 pages of battle got turned into something like 2.5 hours of on-screen battle. Tolkien didn't write, and I can't remember off the top of my head, the Battle of the Hornburg, how many pages that was. I suspect he probably wouldn't have matched Gimli and Legolas. He was a lot more looking for things, trying to organize stuff, whereas Legolas and Gimli were very much in the thick of things, just killing orcs left, right, and center. So I suspect that he wouldn't have won Gimli one, just in case anyone's wondering there. So I suspect that he wouldn't have beaten either of their tallies. But I mean, yeah, he definitely killed his fair share. I think it's probably fair to say. Sorry, having said that, did you have any? Do you think he would have won that?
I think, well, you're spot on when you say he's taken a commanding role. He's not in the thick of it all the time, but I think he's got a disadvantage that when he wields Anduril, he probably sends a lot of orcs running in the opposite direction. He probably doesn't get to kill as many as he'd maybe like to kill, and that's maybe something that would work against him as well. But I don't know. It's comparing battle prowess and that. I'd probably say Aragorn would beat them if he was in the same position that they were in fighting. But we know that he wasn't. He's taken a similar role to a king or one of his generals. He's not right in there like Gimli would be, and that's how he managed to win the competition, cutting all the heads off. So.
Absolutely. Okay, question from Caius Ballerina asking, do we know how Aragorn felt about being mortal? Oh, this is a really interesting question because, I mean, I don't think it's directly tackled. I think he was probably a bit frustrated the fact that he was mortal, whereas Arwen wasn't. But the line of Númenórean kings, this was the big thing for them, was this struggle with this idea of humanity being mortal, whereas the elves were not. This was a huge battle and struggle for them. And Tolkien, in his sort of theology of all of this, when you're reading through the Silmarillion, the idea of this mortality is actually supposed to be a blessing for humanity, whereas humanity saw it more as a curse. So although this may sound like quite a straightforward question, I think is actually quite multi. I'm sure you meant it this way as well, Caius Ballerina. It's quite a multi-layered one. What Aragorn thought about his mortality. I mean, I'd love to know, Stephen, if you've got a specific view on this. My take is I don't think he specifically talks about it, but I think that he, by implication, is content with his lot in life, and I think that is probably as far as we can go. But I don't know whether you know of any time when he was raving against his mortal life or delighting in it.
There's one time where he laments his mortality. It's actually when Gandalf takes him and finds the sapling of the tree. When Gandalf, is telling Aragorn of the importance of being king, not just of Gondor, but of a wider realm, the realm of men. Gandalf, I keep getting confused. Aragorn openly says, I'll die," and he's kind of upset that he's got this weight on his shoulders, this responsibility, and he's maybe not got enough time to do everything Gandalf is saying. And I think that's the only time that he mentions this mortality. But like you say, he's more like a Númenórean king of old, where he would accept the gift of men. He wouldn't see it as a curse or the doom of men. And I think in general he realizes that they're just different from elves. It's not necessarily worse, and he would accept it, and that's why we get to that point where Aragorn willingly dies. It's through his will that he dies. That's only really achievable by someone who doesn't fear death and doesn't hold anything against death being a natural thing for men. So I would agree with you there, but there is that one moment where he seems to be a little bit upset that he's not got longer to enjoy this kingdom, but that's the only one I can think of when he brings that up.
That's a really good take, actually. I hadn't spotted that one, but yeah. So it's not so much lamenting his mortality so much as lamenting the fact that this means that he can't do the things that he would want to do or feels called to do. Question from a reflective rambling. Thank you, picking up one for Devyani, saying in the books, Aragorn doesn't have the test or temptation to take the ring like many others do, whereas in the movie he did. I thought that this was a really nice, touching moment. Thoughts? Yeah, so this is quite an interesting one. So the Aragorn, they make quite a big play of this in the movie. I think this is he like Isildur, and I think this was a good thing to do. I quite like this as a sort of a take on this. Is he like Isildur? We're shown that Isildur was tempted by the ring, obviously succumbed to the temptation, and Aragorn is set up the heir to Isildur. Whereas in the books, as much as other times he's there as the heir of Elendil, incidentally, it's the Isildur thing isn't as strong in the books. But he doesn't have the same, like with Boromir, he doesn't seem to sort of have that huge temptation moment. He did have one. I'll see whether I can get the quote up in a moment. I'll throw it over to you, Stephen. He does, when meeting in Bree with the hobbits, I'm pretty sure it's then, he does sort of like go, I could take this from you right now, but I'm not going to. And there's just a moment where it's not quite the Galadriel moment when she's like all, listing all the things that she could be, but there's just a hint of that. I'll see whether I can find that quote for you. But what's your take on this? Do you think it's good that he gets or doesn't have a proper testing moment?
I agree with you. I quite like that moment in the film. Are we talking about the seat of seeing? You know, when Frodo has his hand open with the ring and Aragorn closes his hand over and tells him again that he said he would go with him to Mordor. I do like that moment, but in the books he actually does get offered the ring in a way at the council. You know, when Frodo hears the story about who Aragorn actually is, and then he like jumps up out his seat and says the ring belongs to you, and Aragorn actually says, no, you should keep it for a while, basically, until we decide what to do with it. It's as if Aragorn's not tempted at all by it, but other characters in the Fellowship don't really mention taking it either. So this is maybe one change in the films that I think works really well, and I think in Bree, Aragorn is probably just putting some fear into the hobbits to get past this initial who are you, what are you doing here, should we help you, should we trust you. He kind of puts a bit of fear into the hobbits, something like Gandalf would maybe do. I don't think he was maybe tempted at that moment, but yeah, I didn't actually think of the movie.
Yeah, I've got the quote. I've got the quote here, and actually, now you say there's something that Gandalf would do. I'll come back to that because I think this is there is an echo here. So basically, Sam, obviously being Sam, challenges him and says, but you might not be the real Strider that Gandalf talks about. How can we possibly trust you? What have you to say to that? And then Aragorn says, I have to say that you are a stout fellow, but I am afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. And I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now, and now is capitalized there in the text. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will. Which is a great little scene. And the what I said about the Gandalf thing, that does seem, when he suddenly stands up and seems to sort of loom larger, this is very much a kind of like what Gandalf did with Bilbo. It's just I could do this. I am stupidly more powerful than you guys, but I'm not going to. And rereading that there, when he puts his hand on the sword, I always find wonderful new things, and whenever I'm rereading Tolkien, they would have interpreted that as a threat. He put his hand on his sword, but as we were just saying a bit earlier, his sword's broken. So actually, he knows he's not putting his hand on the sword to threaten them. He knows he's reminding himself of who he is and what his role is. So, and that's the point at which he then says, "But I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn." I think that he does. He's not unaffected by it. I think that would be against all of the kind of the law that we have here, but at the same time, he rises above it in a way that others don't. Karis Ballerina picking up a question for the hero, saying, since it's alluded to that Strider is aware of Frodo's journey and what he carries long before they first met, is there any information as to why he first begins tracking the ring? If you're talking there about him being aware of Frodo's journey, so Gandalf had told him, and Gandalf told Strider, keep an eye out for them, they're coming. He'd left the message with Barliman Butterbur, basically saying, there's a guy here called Strider, he's for you. So this is all there and above board and was part of the plan. In hunting for the ring, this was, again, as we were talking about a little bit earlier in the stream, I don't know whether you're here, but this was Gandalf and Aragorn working together to try to hunt for for Gollum and to try and make that missing link there in the story of the One Ring. Did you have anything to add on to that one, Stephen?
No, that's covered it. He does mention that he overheard them speaking with Tom Bombadil, which is quite interesting. He knows who he is. But yeah, he's well aware of them at that time because of Gandalf, and he's then suddenly in the inn waiting for them, and that's all written there.
Okay, Kugelbit saying Aragorn fat shaming poor Barliman. That's.
I love that bit.
I always felt that was a little bit beneath him, I have to say. Barliman was a fine figure, and again, another figure that was unnecessarily done the dirty in the movies, in my view. Let's get to a question from Mara Lee. This is about inspirations. Who or what are the sources that inspired Tolkien to come up with the character of Aragorn? What other classic heroes in fictional stories could we compare him to? Would King Arthur be one? If we would compare him to a fictional character in A Song of Ice and Fire, who would that be? I don't know if this is something you've ever looked into. Have you got any thoughts on inspirations for Aragorn or other fictional characters?
Well, yeah, the obvious one that was mentioned in that question was King Arthur. Mm-hmm. And there's the sword, obviously, the king, born to be the king, and there's also some interesting translations of those legends that they seem to tie them a bit closer. There's a translation where Arthur is taken in by elves. He's enchanted with magic. He's to become the best of all knights, and he's given long life, and he's a long life and generosity, I think the quote says, and that's really Aragorn like. But there's also Ivanhoe, Sir Walter Scott. There's a character in that called Sir Wilfrid, I think he's called, and he's known as the Disinherited Knight, and he walks around in ragged clothes. He's a homeless wanderer, but underneath he's a noble knight. I think he's the son of Cedric the Saxon, that figure. He goes on a pilgrimage to Holy Land, and that's really, I think that's really Aragorn-like as well. And then the final one would be, it's probably not intentional and might be controversial, but Aragorn's quite Christ-like, I think, and he's one of those three figures, along with Frodo and Gandalf, that you would say have got Christ-like qualities, maybe not intentional on Tolkien's part, but he has that journey through hell, what we could call it, where he converses with the dead and deals with them. There's the messianic Return of the King title, and that whole part with the healing hands as well. That's the sign that he's the king. It's not like his prowess in battle or anything like that. It's the fact that he comes to Gondor and heals the injured. I just think that's really maybe Tolkien's faith is coming through there, maybe even subconsciously. But yeah, I think those are inspirations for Aragorn in some way.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Kugel Blitz picks up a real-life inspiration, saying Aragorn was supposedly inspired by an Anglo-Saxon king of Northumbria who lived in exile in Scotland for most of his life. This is St. Oswald. There have been a couple of books written about the potential inspiration of St. Oswald. He was the heir to the kingdom of Northumbria. Then he went off in exile for a long time to, I think it was to Iona, for fans of Celtic spirituality, which is a very sort of famous island just off of the west coast of Scotland. But then at some point he converted to Christianity and heads back with an army and reclaims his throne in Northumbria. And in sort of thanksgiving for this, he establishes Lindisfarne, which is another very famous island, sort of a holy island off of the northeast coast of England. And so that is a Return of the King motif. Also, interestingly, one thing there, Mara, you asked in your question about links across to A Song of Ice and Fire. Interestingly, one of the things that King Oswald was called was King of the North. So there is clearly, and this gives me a chance to regurgitate my pithy take on what George R. R. Martin is doing with Jon Snow, which is that George R. R. Martin is writing Jon Snow as if he is Aragorn, the long promised, the prince that was promised, the heir of prophecy, the inheritor of great mysteries, going to reign in the future. But in reality, Jon Snow is more like Frodo, the character who is carrying this great burden, and yes, he will save the world, but he's going to be scarred by it. And eventually, if you go all the way to the last scene of the TV show, which I suspect for reasons that are very long and complicated and I won't go into here, will probably be the last scene of the books, Jon Snow heading north of the wall, leaving the Seven Kingdoms behind, has echoes of Frodo at the end of The Lord of the Rings heading off to the west, because they have both been broken by what they went through. They may have saved the world that they were in, but it's not for them. So anyway, that's sort of inspiration. Also, I think King Alfred also gets mentioned a lot as Alfred the Great, the first King of England, who, if you watch The Last Kingdom, you'll be very aware of him. But he had periods of time in exile and was also quite a learned man and sort of great and wise king. So there's echoes of him in there as well. I think I've got one more question from... Oh, this wasn't actually from one of my patrons. This was from one of your subscribers, Narsil Marillion, which is a great name, it has to be said. As a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire, can Robert share his thoughts on George R. R. Martin's views on Aragorn, orc genocide, tax policies, etc.? Do I share similar views to George R. R. Martin? Well, you'll be delighted to know I have actually done full videos on both of them. I try not to plug my videos too much on my live streams, but for longer answers on both of those, I did a dedicated video on what was Aragorn's tax policy and also Aragorn's orc genocide, which were the two things that George R. R. Martin did specifically critique. Now, I would love your thought on this as someone. I know you've watched the TV show, but you're not really hugely into the books of A Song of Ice and Fire, so I'll be interested in your take on this. So George R. R. Martin basically, he is a huge Tolkien fan, a massive Tolkien geek. There's no getting around it. If you read any interviews with him, he always name checks Tolkien and talks about him. But he always comes up, and there are a few different things that he just sort of like does what seems like a friendly critique. And one of these is to say that for all of the great world building that Tolkien undoubtedly did, he didn't care huge amounts about the sort of the logistics of how economies worked and things like that. And what he really wants to know is what was Aragorn's tax policy, which I took as a serious question and turned into a video. But my general take is I think actually Tolkien, when you did it, because I then turned that into a series of videos about how did the Hobbit economy work. I've got tomorrow, incidentally, quick plug, my Sauron's economic policy is coming out. So if you ever wanted to know what Sauron's economic policy was, that's a video coming out tomorrow, because he did have one, because he was ruling a huge amount of land for a huge amount of time whilst plotting and planning to overrun the rest of the country. He did have to have an economic plan. But my take is that Tolkien did write about this, but he didn't just write it in sort of like a big clump of background material. He clearly didn't give it as much of a prominence as he did to his languages. But when you start sifting through, you do actually find a huge amount of information there. And also he critiqued the orc genocide thing, was all the orcs died and were hunted down by Aragorn. What even the baby orcs in their baby orc cradles was what his quote was. My take is actually, when you read it, most of the orcs died straight away in the immediate aftermath. When Sauron went, the sort of the empowering link between him and them was broken, and many of them, we read, they just either died on the spot or jumped into chasms or committed suicide. It was all bad and wrong. So there wasn't really much by way of orcs left after that. But do you have a take on either of that, on George R. R. Martin's take on Tolkien?
I think they're probably asking that because not to plug my own videos, but the last one I did was about orcs in the Fourth Age, and I mentioned that quote from George R. R. Martin, and I thought it was, I know he's a huge Tolkien fan, but I thought it was quite a misunderstanding of Aragorn, a bit like we talked earlier about beheading the mouth of Sauron. It's the idea that Aragorn would, bring about some policy of let's go and wipe out all the orcs just doesn't seem like that character we've been reading about the whole time. I think it's more we'll attack them if they come for us, and as the realms of men spread, it just seems like a consequence that they're going to end up fighting with orcs. They're not going to share land with orcs, and it's not Aragorn that's going to say let's go and wipe them all out. And like you say, a lot of them would have fled or died after Sauron was defeated, but there would still be orcs out there, and I think as a race they would just naturally diminish. They don't have that Dark Lord forcing them to breed huge armies, and I think they would just, like other races, diminish over time. Maybe not naturally, but through maybe a random orc would be spotted and slain or something like that, and it would just keep happening, and they would just, over time, the numbers wouldn't grow. I think that's why that person asked that question. But for the tax policy one, I think again that's to do with I read Tolkien as maybe far more mythological than George R. R. Martin might. I think the idea that Tolkien would go into detail about Aragorn's tax policy when he becomes king is less important than the journey for him to become king, and the fact that afterwards men will prosper for a time, and like you said at the beginning of the stream, all is well, at least for some period of time. I don't really need to know the what legislation he brought in or how he ruled the kingdom. It's a bit like asking, what was King Arthur's or No, how did what happened with Beowulf? No, it's one of these. Why would you want to know that stuff? It's not that type of story. It's not that type of novel. It's not a Song of Ice and Fire. So I think George Martin was maybe expecting something that Tolkien was never going to deliver. But you did say you have a video on Sauron's economy, so I'm really interested in that because I've never thought about that at all. So
Yes, that's coming out tomorrow. There's actually a lot of that you get from a moment when Tolkien breaks. I always spoil my own videos when I announce them, but Tolkien breaks POV, and you get Sam, who's that when Sam and Frodo arrive there in the plains of Gorgoroth, up in this really horrible bit of Mordor, and it's like, how on earth can anything survive here? And then Tolkien just kind of like zooms out almost for about 1 or 2 sentences and sort of says, well, little did they know that further to the south there's this great big plain here where you get lots of people who are growing food, and then there's these wagon trains, and it's just like, oh, okay then. So he clearly did think about this, but it's the kind of blink and you miss it because you're not really caring that much about the Sauron's economic policy at the time. You're worrying about what's happening with Sam and Frodo. But yes, I think the point you made, that Tolkien doesn't, he cares less about the Fourth Age. He zooms out. The thing that matters to him is that, as I said, all is well. That he is a good king. Aragorn is a good king. That's the thing we care about. It would be a complete disaster if after all of this Aragorn turns out actually not to be a good king. The thing we need to know is that he is a good king. And we need to know the few details about what happened after. So he gave freedom to the Shire and independence to the Shire, and he gave freedom to the Sauron slaves, and those kinds of things we care about. We don't need to know all of the detail, but we can read between the lines. Question from Songbird: do you think the ringwraiths knew who Aragorn was when they first battled? Oh, interesting. So this is presumably a Weathertop question. Did they know? I think this is one of those ones where maybe there's like a little comment somewhere along the line that might give it away one way or the other, but my take is no, because this was the whole point towards the end is when Aragorn is there holding. I mean, it wasn't quite like this in the books, but it was really good on when they showed it on the movies, when he's like holding the Palantir and he's like shaking like that and he's looking into it, challenging Sauron. This is like the whole point is that this is when he's introducing himself to Sauron. I am the king, here's the sword. Before that, although Sauron may have been thinking, I wonder whether there's somebody out there who is the heir, he's not actively looking for him, and he would have been active if the Nazgul had reported back, by the way, the heir of Isildur is here, we probably should do something about that. He would definitely have been doing something about that. But what's your take? Do you think there's any hint that they do know who he is?
no, I was just going to say exactly what you brought up when Aragorn speaks or challenges Sauron through the Palantir. It's said that he's revealed himself to Sauron. This is why Sauron starts to change his tactics and his plans, challenging too soon. And if he knew about it earlier, because you have to remember, when the ringwraiths fight Aragorn later, they're decloaked and they return to Mordor, they would have told Sauron, I would suspect. So the secret of Aragorn would have been revealed way earlier, and Sauron would have released his forces earlier as well. It's the whole point that to get Sauron to do what they want, Aragorn chooses to finally reveal who he is to Sauron, and that's what helps in Sauron's downfall, because he rushes into things after that. So I don't think there's any hint that the Nazgul understood who this was.
Yeah, I think they knew he was a mighty warrior, but that's pretty much it. And they will have been aware, I suspect, of the Rangers as a concept. Yeah. Jewel Elson, thank you so much for the super sticker. I'll just have a very quick flick through. Connor Shupp saying the ringwraiths definitely know about the Rangers at Sarn Ford and believe they'd scattered what was left of the Dunedain then. A surprise to be sure. Carl Karsnark saying J.R.R. Tolkien is writing about a world mythos. George R.R. Martin is writing more about the human heart in conflict with itself, macro versus micro, epic versus intimate. Yeah, I think that's an incredibly valid point. Just quickly flick through. Maddox saying, I love theories, but sometimes you need to read to it. That's absolutely right, although I'm one of those people who does read too much into these kinds of things, which probably is why I make videos about them. I need some sort of outlet. And Carl Karstark saying, I think George R. Martin is just being cheeky and expressing his own interest in the nitty-gritty of day-to-day life in fantasy. Yeah, I think I wouldn't disagree with that. Okay, I think with that, let's start bringing this one to a close. Stephen, thank you so much. You've been a fantastic guest on here, so thank you so much for that. Have you any sort of closing remarks or thoughts on Aragorn? Something you've been dying to say, to tell us, wisdom that you've been wishing to share, but just not had the moment?
No. I think we've covered... I really like that a lot of what we've covered is this... No, I don't know how much your audience are just aware of the movies, or they maybe prefer Aragorn from the movies. I think I just appreciated that we got to really talk about Tolkien's Aragorn. He's not a one-dimensional, no development type of character. He's he does develop over the Lord of the Rings and before it. We got into details about his relationship with Arwen. He's the quest that he's on to reunite the kingdoms, and I just like that kind of level of detail. We're not just saying Aragorn did this and everything was great. We're actually getting into talk of his character, which I don't think it's talked about enough. So yeah, it's just, I really appreciate being on to talk about that. I like getting into that kind of depth with these characters, and I'm a bit jealous of Dan from Voice of Geekdom. He got to talk about Gandalf, who's my favourite character.
I'm so sorry about that.
Aragorn's up there, so yeah, I've really enjoyed it.
Well, I'm thinking of doing Galadriel next, so if you know anyone whose favourite character is Galadriel, then by all means let me know. But in the meantime, do you want to just remind people who have been wowed by your wisdom where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, in the description for this video, there's the link to my channel. It's called The Red Book. If you type it into the search, you might find a lot of psychological channels. It's a bit unfortunate that I picked that name. But yeah, I'm The Red Book, and the link's in the description. And if you want any videos about Aragorn, like we've talked about, I've got quite a few. And I'm always up for suggestions. It's a great place to have debates in the comments as well. It's a good channel for that. And if you've never watched any of my videos, I hope you go and check them out.
Excellent. And I would highly encourage people to go and do that as well. Stephen has got an excellent channel with some fantastic videos out there. A lot of them are sort of asking questions in the same way that a lot of my videos are questions, and yours go quite deep into the lore of the books as well. So if that kind of thing appeals to you, then please do go and check out Stephen's channel. You're also on Twitter, at least. I don't know whether there are other places, but I shall plug your Twitter as well, because you come out with some fantastic things over there too. Right, I will make you disappear very briefly so I can point at things. If you are watching this back a little bit later, there will be a link appearing somewhere around here to some of the other live streams that I've been doing in previous weeks, months and years, and there will be a link appearing somewhere around here to my Patreon, which is the place to go to support this channel if you are so minded. Thank you so much again, Stephen. Take care, everyone. I will be back next week looking at Game of Thrones Book 1. I finished my re-listen of the way through that, and I've got very special guest Aziz from the History of Westeros, who is the expert, and so I'm delighted I've got him on next week. But I'll be back in a few weeks' time with another Lord of the Rings one. Okay, take care, everyone. Thanks, and see you again soon.